A bankrupt black widower bought a 20-year-old girl who was being auctioned by her parents. $25.00 for the last lot of the day. A 20-year-old girl, healthy and obedient, announced the sheriff, his voice echoing in the dusty square of Silver Creek. The May 2025 sun beat down mercilessly as townsfolk watched, some in ashamed silence, others with morbid curiosity, at the grotesque spectacle unfolding. Elijah Carter, a 44-year-old widower and the only black landowner in the region, stood at the back of the crowd, fists clenched. His heart pounded with a mix of rage and dread, knowing this act would mark him forever in a town already eager to see him fail. The girl on the makeshift platform kept her gaze fixed on the ground, her disheveled hair partially covering a fresh bruise on her face. Her parents, a worn-out couple hardened by life, watched with vacant expressions, though her father's eyes glinted with a cold satisfaction at the prospect of profit. $30.00, shouted a gruff voice from the opposite side. Tom Reed, the local saloon owner, raised his hand with a smile that didn't hide his intentions. The girl trembled visibly. $35.00, came a second voice. James Holt, a farmer known for his violent temper, especially after a few drinks. Elijah closed his eyes briefly. $35.00 was nearly all he had left after the drought that devastated his small farm. It was the money he'd saved for next season's seeds, his last chance to save the land he'd fought so hard for after his wife's death. But now, staring at the girl's defeated posture, he saw his late wife's face in her place, her own humiliations in this town flashing through his mind, urging him to act. $50.00, Elijah's deep voice cut through the crowd's murmur. A stunned silence fell over the square. Dozens of pale faces turned toward him, their expressions a mix of shock and barely concealed outrage. The girl's father narrowed his eyes, his mouth twisting in a blend of contempt and greed. "You think you can play hero, Carter," he spat, his voice dripping with venom. "She's not worth it. I'm not handing over my daughter yet." $75.00, he interrupted, stepping closer to the center. "In gold coins, now." The sheriff cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. "Mr. Carter, I don't think—" "The law says any free man can bid at a public auction," Elijah said, unflinching. "Unless you'd like to explain to the federal judge why you rejected the highest offer." For the first time, the girl looked up. For a brief moment, her eyes met Elijah's. There was no hope in them, only resignation and a weariness too deep for someone so young. Yet, in that fleeting glance, he saw a flicker of defiance, a buried spark that mirrored his own refusal to break under the town's cruelty. $75.00, going once, the sheriff announced reluctantly. Reed and Holt exchanged glances, but didn't counter. The silence stretched, heavy with the crowd's disbelief, as if the air itself held its breath, waiting for someone to undo this unthinkable act. "Sold!" The sheriff slammed his gavel. The square erupted in outraged murmurs. As Elijah approached to complete the payment, memories flooded him. His late wife, Hannah, humiliated in this same square years ago when they tried to drive them out of town. Her simple grave, where she'd rested for 3 years since succumbing to pneumonia no local doctor would treat. The suffocating loneliness of his cabin. And now, the weight of every eye on him, branding him as both savior and sinner, a man who'd crossed a line no one in Silver Creek would forgive. The girl stepped down from the platform with hesitant steps. Up close, Elijah saw older bruises on her arms. She kept her eyes down as if she'd learned the hard way that looking up meant punishment. "What's your name?" he asked, keeping a respectful distance. "Emma," she whispered, barely audible. "Emma Lawson." Elijah nodded. "I'm Elijah Carter. I know who you are," she said, surprising him. "Everyone does." Her voice carried a bitter edge, as if her knowledge of his reputation, whispered in taverns and church pews, as the black man who dared to own land, had already shaped her expectations of this moment. As they left the square, the crowd's murmurs grew louder. "My God, they sold the girl to a black man. This won't end well. Someone should do something." Elijah felt the weight of hostile stares like knives in his back. Emma walked a step behind, as if trained to do so, Passing the saloon, Tom Reed spat on the ground. "That's a high price for something you won't keep long, Carter," he taunted loudly. Elijah didn't respond, though his grip on the wagon's reins tightened, his knuckles whitening as he fought the urge to confront the man whose words echoed the town's unspoken threat. He kept walking to the wagon parked at the town's edge, where his old horse waited patiently. Helping Emma onto the wagon, he noticed her trembling. Not from fear of him, but from something worse. The expectation of what might come next based on all she'd endured. "I won't hurt you," he said quietly, for her ears only. "You have my word." For the first time she looked at him directly. Her eyes held not just pain, but a spark of something Elijah recognized instantly, the same quiet determination that had kept him alive in a world that wanted him dead. But there was also a shadow of doubt, as if she'd heard promises before, only to have them shattered by betrayal. "Why?" she asked simply. Elijah didn't answer right away. He started the wagon, then said, "Because I know what it's like to be treated as property." He paused, his voice lowering, as he added, "And because no one else in that square saw you as anything more than a thing to be owned. I couldn't let that stand." As the wagon rolled away from town under the townsfolk's hostile gazes, no one noticed the small metal object Emma hid in her worn shoe, or the brief glance she shared with a figure in the shadows. There was far more to this quiet young woman than anyone could imagine, something that would forever change Silver Creek's fate. She clutched the object tighter, her fingers tracing its edges, a secret she'd guarded through months of abuse, knowing it held the power to unravel the town's corrupt heart. Elijah's cabin was 5 miles from town, isolated among dry fields and a small oak grove. When they arrived, the sun had set, casting the landscape in blue shadows. Emma silently observed the modest but well-kept property, the small barn, the stone well surrounded by a drought-ravaged garden. "This is it," Elijah said, stepping down from the wagon. "Not much, but it's mine. No one will bother you here." He avoided her gaze, as if bracing for her judgment of the humble life he'd carved out against all odds. Emma stayed in the wagon, her eyes calculating distances, assessing escape routes like a cornered animal. When she finally stepped down, she kept several paces away. "There's a room in the back," Elijah explained. "It was my son's. It has a lock on the inside." The mention of a son made Emma frown. "My son, Noah, died with his mother. Pneumonia, 3 winters ago," Elijah said, no self-pity in his voice, and his words hung in the air. And for a moment, Emma's guarded expression softened, as if recognizing a shared wound in the man who'd bought her freedom at such a cost. Inside the cabin, a lamp glowed on the central table, a sign someone had been there recently. Emma noticed and tensed instantly. "Wait here," Elijah said, sensing her unease. He quickly checked the house, then relaxed. Clara was here. She left food. At the name, Emma reacted. "Clara Boone, the midwife?" Elijah nodded, surprised. "You know her." "She helped my mother once?" Emma said evasively, her voice tightening as she recalled her mother's desperate pleas for help, ignored by the town's elite. The cabin was simple but meticulously organized. Books were neatly aligned on makeshift shelves, a cedar table darkened by time but polished to a shine. It wasn't the chaotic space of a defeated man, but the disciplined refuge of someone who refused to give up. "You're planning to run tonight, aren't you?" Elijah asked calmly over dinner. Emma froze, her body taut as a violin string about to snap. "I don't blame you," he continued, "but there are 3 men patrolling the woods to the east, bounty hunters, hired by the mayor after 2 workers fled the Grayson plantation." He leaned forward, his eyes searching hers. "If you run, they'll catch you, and they won't care about the truth. Stay, and we can fight this together." "I'm not a slave," Emma snapped. "No, you're not," Elijah agreed, "but try explaining that to those men in the dark." He hesitated, then added, "I saw what they did to the last person who tried to run. You don't deserve that fate." The next morning, Emma found the cabin empty, the door unlocked. She wasn't a prisoner. Through the window, she saw Elijah working in the dry garden, trying to revive dying plants with well water. While searching the cabin for money or valuables, Emma found something unexpected. A federal law book, heavily annotated, and letters signed by a Professor Thompson from Harvard University. Her hands trembled as she read the letters, realizing Elijah wasn't just a farmer, but a man waging a quiet war against the town's corruption, his every move calculated to expose its lies. Behind her, she could investigate further. She heard hoofbeats approaching. 3 riders entered the property. Emma recognized Tom Reed, joined by James Holt, and a third man with an elegant bearing and a calculatedly friendly expression. Elijah dropped his hoe and walked toward them, upright, face impassive. "Carter," Reed said with false warmth. "We've come to introduce Mr. Ellis, the new county judge." The tall man tipped his head in a greeting that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Carter, I've heard much about you." "We're inspecting properties," Ellis explained, "to update county records." His smile was sharp. A predator sizing up prey. And Emma's stomach churned as she recognized the same calculated cruelty she'd seen in her father's allies. "My taxes are paid," Elijah replied, "every year." "It's not about taxes," Holt cut in with a malicious grin. "It's about suitability." "Unproductive land can be seized for better use," Ellis added. Emma watched Elijah's jaw tighten, though his expression stayed neutral. "This property's been in my name since 1872, with all proper documents." He stood taller, his voice steady but laced with defiance, as if daring them to test his resolve. "Times change, Carter," Reed sneered. "Laws change." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "And men like you don't belong on land this valuable. Enjoy it while it lasts." When the men left, Emma confronted Elijah. "They want your land." "They've always wanted it," he replied, returning to work as if nothing had happened. "Why? It's nearly ruined by the drought." Elijah hesitated. "Because there's something here worth far more than a few acres." His eyes darkened, and for the first time, Emma saw the weight of secrets he carried, secrets that could either save them or doom them both. That afternoon, Clara Boone arrived in her covered wagon, a middle-aged black woman with a commanding presence and sharp eyes. She brought supplies, seeds, and news. "The new judge visited 4 properties today," she reported, examining Emma's bruises, "all owned by black or immigrant families." Elijah nodded, as if confirming his suspicions. "And this," Clara handed him a sealed envelope, "came by telegraph today. Jenkins asked me to deliver it discreetly." As Elijah read, his expression turned cold and resolute. "Emma," he called, "I need to know exactly what you overheard at your father's meetings with Mayor Harlan." Shock flashed across Emma's face briefly. "How do you know about that?" "Because," Clara said kindly, "you're not the first girl we've tried to help escape that family." Then Emma understood. Elijah hadn't bought a girl at a cruel auction out of random compassion. The object in her shoe, a small ornate key, suddenly felt infinitely heavier. "My father keeps a black ledger locked in his desk," she revealed at last. "Records of payments, names, dates. Mayor Harlan is planning something big, involving Judge Ellis and land along the river." Elijah and Clara exchanged glances. "That's why your father was so willing to auction you publicly?" Elijah said. Emma nodded, a single tear escaping. "I've heard too much, seen too much." Her voice broke as she added, "They thought selling me would silence me, but they didn't know I'd already taken the one thing that could destroy them." In town, rumors spread like wildfire about the black man who dared buy a white girl, about suspicious late-night visitors to his property, about the railroad line set to connect the county to newly discovered mines. No one noticed the black ledger missing from Mr. Lawson's house or the coded telegrams sent late at night. What Silver Creek's powerful didn't know was that sometimes the invisible see best, and true revolution begins not with shouts, but with whispers in the shadows, and plans woven by hands with nothing to lose, only a future to claim. 3 days after Judge Ellis's visit, an unexpected storm hit Silver Creek. No one noticed the small figure moving behind the town hall in the chaos, a dark cloak shielding her from prying eyes. Emma Lawson, believed to be confined as Elijah Carter's property, infiltrated the heart of local power. The key she'd carried in her shoe, stolen from her father's desk weeks earlier, finally found its purpose in Mayor Harlan's office. Her hands shook as she turned the lock, knowing that one wrong move could end everything, not just for her, but for Elijah, and the fragile hope they'd built together. Meanwhile, Elijah entered the telegraph office, soaked to the bone. Jenkins, the operator with quiet sympathy for the marginalized, nodded. "Lines open to Boston," he said softly, leaving Elijah alone with the machine. As he tapped out the message, his fingers moved with the precision of a man who'd spent years planning this moment, each word a step toward dismantling the town's corrupt foundation. The next morning, the sun shone relentlessly. Mayor Harlan, Judge Ellis, and 3 wealthy farmers met at Reed's saloon, visibly tense. "What do you mean?" "Gone," Harlan hissed, pale as wax. "Documents don't vanish on their own." "The cabinet was locked," Ellis replied, tugging nervously at his tie. "No one but you has the key." Tom Reed poured another round of whiskey. "That Black Carter, I always knew he was trouble." "Impossible," Harlan snapped. He'd never get into the town hall unseen. But his voice faltered, a crack in his confidence as he realized the depth of their exposure. What they didn't know was that, at that moment, 5 copies of the stolen documents were posted at the church, market, and town hall entrances. Clara Boone, with the calm of someone running errands, pinned up papers revealing the conspiracy, a plan to seize strategic land before the railroad's official announcement. Each flyer was a dagger to the heart of Harlan's empire, and as the townsfolk gathered, their whispers grew into a roar of outrage that echoed through the streets. When the church bells struck 11, a special train arrived at the small station. 3 men in impeccable suits stepped off, a Continental Railroad representative, a Federal Land Office official, and a New York Times reporter. Elijah greeted them, leading them down the main street, where a crowd had already gathered around the flyers. Rumors swelled as ordinary citizens discovered the scale of corruption documented in Lawson's black ledger. The air buzzed with tension, as if the town itself sensed the reckoning that had finally arrived. "It's a forgery!" Mayor Harlan shouted from the saloon's doorway. "Fabricated lies!" "Including your signature on every page, Mayor?" the federal official asked politely. "Or perhaps the map detailing how you plan to reroute the railroad to benefit illegally acquired land is fake too?" Harlan's face drained of color, his hands trembling as he realized the trap had closed around him. James Holt tried to slip out the back, only to find the sheriff blocking his path. "You knew?" Holt asked, incredulous. "Not everything," the sheriff replied, "but enough to not stop what's happening." The crowd grew. Faces that once avoided Elijah now looked at him with a mix of shock and reluctant respect. The real surprise came when Emma emerged from the church with Reverend Baxter. This young woman, the Reverend announced, at great personal risk provided critical evidence of crimes affecting every citizen of this town. Her presence sent a shockwave through the crowd, her bruised arms a silent testament to the cost of her courage. Emma stood tall, her gaze fixed on her father's furious eyes as he arrived. "You," Lawson growled, advancing. "I wouldn't," the federal agent interjected. "Your daughter's already given us enough details about how you and the mayor forged property documents for at least 6 families over the past 3 years." Emma's eyes burned with a quiet fire, her silence more powerful than any accusation, as her father's empire crumbled before her. A telegram was publicly handed to Judge Ellis. The New York Bar Association is keen to learn how a man disbarred for fraud is now acting as a judge in another state, the reporter noted. "You can't do this," Harlan hissed, glancing frantically around. "This town is mine." "Was," the railroad representative corrected. "The Continental plans were particularly interested in how our confidential plans were leaked prematurely." The ensuing chaos was meticulously documented. Harlan's failed escape attempt, Reed's desperate confession, Lawson's furious tears as agents seized the black ledger from his home. The most extraordinary moment came when Emma faced her father publicly. "You sold me," she said, unwavering, "like I was less than human. How did you sell this town's dignity?" Her voice rang out, clear and unbroken, a blade cutting through years of silence and shame. Lawson, cornered, revealed the depth of his cruelty. "What did you expect? Your mother ran because she couldn't stand looking at you, the living reminder of our mistake. You've never been worth the air you breathe." His words were a final act of venom meant to break her, but Emma stood unmoved, her strength a beacon in the face of his collapse. The silence was broken by Elijah's calm voice. "Every person in this square is worth exactly the same, Mr. Lawson. That's the truth you've tried to bury, that human dignity has no price." His words carried the weight of a man who'd fought for that truth every day of his life, a quiet challenge to a town that had tried to erase him. As the conspirators were taken into custody, the uproar only grew. Some demanded immediate justice. Others, who once would have scorned Elijah, now sought to align with the moral victory. Few noticed the quiet conversation between Elijah and the railroad representative, or how the federal agent carefully reviewed Carter's land deeds. No one saw the glance Clara and Emma shared when the reporter requested an interview, but the town felt the shift, a seismic change born from the courage of two people who refused to be defined by others' cruelty. The town had been shaken to its core, but a question lingered, whispered in the square's corners as the crowd dispersed. How had a black man and a souled girl not only survived, but defeated the powerful who controlled every aspect of this society? The answer lay in the exposed documents, the letters exchanged with Boston, and a plan begun long before the auction. A plan seeded years ago when a Harvard professor met a self-taught former slave determined to change the world, one letter at a time. 7 months later, the sun rose over a transformed Silver Creek. The train station, once a manipulative pipe dream, now stood real and imposing on the edge of Elijah Carter's land. His property, far from being seized, had become the hub of the new trade route. A continental decision, after discovering Harlan's original route, crossed unstable terrain. The land, once mocked as worthless, now pulsed with possibility, a testament to Elijah's foresight and unbreakable will. Elijah's modest cabin now shared space with a school. What began as makeshift classes for 4 black children rejected by the town's education system quickly grew into an institution, drawing families from neighboring communities. Emma Lawson, now Emma Carter after a quiet wedding, officiated by Reverend Baxter, led the classes with the same silent determination that had toppled a corrupt empire. "I never imagined I'd be teaching," she said one afternoon, watching 25th students, black, white, and immigrant, under the large tree that served as a classroom on warm days. "I was always the girl who could barely look up when spoken to." Her voice carried a quiet pride tempered by the memory of the platform where she'd been sold, a moment that now fueled her mission, to give others the voice she'd reclaimed. Elijah, building new desks for the main room, smiled. "I always knew you had fire in you. You just needed air to breathe." He paused, his hands stilling on the wood, and added, "We're not just teaching them to read. We're teaching them to fight for their place in a world that'll try to take it away." Former Mayor Harlan was serving time in state prison, convicted of fraud and extortion. Judge Ellis, exposed, had fled in the night, though rumors said he'd been arrested in Philadelphia under a false name. Tom Reed had lost his saloon to creditors and now worked as a dockhand on a distant river. As for Emma's father, Lawson, public humiliation drove him into a decline, leaving him a shadow of the once feared man, leaving off favors avoided by all. His downfall was whispered about in every corner of Silver Creek, a cautionary tale of greed and cruelty, undone by the very daughter he'd discarded. "We got a reply from Boston," Clara Boone announced during the weekly dinner that gathered the core group behind the town's transformation. Jenkins, the telegraph operator, Sheriff Henson, who'd finally found the courage to stand on the right side of history, and the others. Thompson, the Harvard professor who'd recognized the legal brilliance of a self-taught former slave years ago and suggested Elijah buy that seemingly worthless land decades before the railroad became reality, had written back. "He accepts our proposal to expand the education project," Clara continued. 12 scholarships for local youth. 12 lives changed, Emma murmured, touching the faint scar on her wrist. a remnant of a past life that felt like someone else's. She closed her eyes, remembering the nights she'd lain awake, plotting her escape, never imagining she'd be building a future not just for herself, but for an entire community. The next day, when the first commercial train officially stopped at Silver Creek Station, a small ceremony was held. The new mayor, an honest merchant elected in a special vote, spoke of progress and renewal, but all eyes were on the Carters, standing quietly to the side. "It's because of you," an elderly woman whispered to Emma, the same woman who'd averted her gaze for months when passing her on the street. "My son got a job at the station. They'd never have hired a boy like him before." The son, a young man with a limp, waved cheerfully from the platform, proudly wearing the railroad's uniform. "We didn't do it alone," Emma replied with a genuine smile. "That's what they don't understand about justice," she told Elijah later, walking home under the orange sunset sky. "It's not just about punishing the guilty. It's about building something better from the ruins." She stopped, her voice softening as she added, "I used to think survival was enough. Now I know it's about leaving a mark that outlasts their hate." Emma paused, looking at the town below, its lights flickering on. "When I was on that platform, sold like an animal, all I wanted was revenge. I wanted everyone to suffer like I had." Elijah nodded, understanding. "And now? Now I see true freedom. Isn't it just breaking chains? It's building a table where everyone can sit." Her words were a vow, a promise to the girl she'd been and the woman she'd become, forged in the fire of a town that tried to erase her. She looked at the man who'd risked everything for her, not out of pity, but principle. "They tried to convince us we were worthless, that I was just a commodity and you were just an outsider on this land. In the end, we proved our worth was never for sale," Elijah added. His voice was steady, but his eyes shone with the quiet triumph of a man who'd turned his pain into purpose. On the horizon, the station's towers stood against the fiery sky, a symbol of an economy now benefiting all, not just the powerful. In the school's classrooms, maps and books promised futures unimaginable months ago. At the town hall, where exploitation was once plotted, a diverse council now met weekly to discuss community improvements. Neither could have foreseen how that desperate act in a dusty square, a black man buying an auctioned girl, would spark not just the downfall of entrenched corruption, but also a light that now illuminated hundreds of lives. True revolution, Elijah often told his students, isn't tearing down walls, it's building bridges where there were only chasms. He'd look at Emma as he spoke, knowing their shared scars had become the foundation for a legacy that would endure. In a society built on divisions, Elijah and Emma had shown that true human dignity transcends race, class, and circumstance. That when those deemed lesser refuse to accept imposed limits, entire worlds can be transformed. "They tried to break us," Emma told her students on the first day of class, "but they forgot that sometimes broken things reflect light in ways the whole never could." And as her students listened, their eyes wide with possibility, Emma knew this was only the beginning of a revolution that would echo far beyond Silver Creek's borders.